Hey, how you guys doing? It's your boy Beastly back at it again with another episode in the Potential Prodigy series. If you're new, hi, how are you? Hope you're having a fantastic morning, evening, night, depending on whatever time you're watching my content. But if you're new, this is basically the series where I give you a cheat sheet, a scouting report, an in-depth breakdown of the attributes that various archetypes have when recruiting in college football 26. That way you can get more elite dev and star dev prospects, and your other online league mates and or the CPU can fight over the normal dev and impact dev prospects. Very quickly, going to address the beginning of this video. We'll have everything timestamped and chaptered after I end up editing this. But these videos I'm going to do for the remaining of this very short CFB 26 season are going to be very short. I do apologize to the people who like the ability breakdowns and who like to have a bunch of examples. I love to show about 10 to 15 examples per video of just me, basically proving my point. However, due to the time constraints of there only being a couple months left of the CFB 26 life cycle, and I have no guarantee that any of these data points, any of this analytics, or even the whole scouting system itself could not carry on over into CFB 27. Is that very likely? No, EA is very lazy of a company, and so they could surprise me, but more than likely all this stuff will carry over. But just in case it doesn't carry over, I am going to pump out the rest of these episodes as quickly as I can, so they're going to be significantly shorter than what they have been if what you guys have been accustomed to. We're also going to cover multiple archetypes per video. Again, we'll have everything chaptered in the description. So yes, if you're curious what happened, basically I'm trying to get all of this done before next year's game, or I guess technically this year's game. And due to me, starting posting CFB 26 content months after everyone else, I was kind of behind the 8 ball, off jump. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into this video. So as you guys can see, we have the second to last Mike archetype we're going to be covering first in this video, being the Lurker archetype. Now, because I'm going to significantly reduce the number of examples I'm going to be showing you, I will show you an example of an elite dev, an example of a star dev, one normal dev, and one impact dev. Give you the number points. That's obviously not going to change, but these are, again, going to be significantly quicker. So very quickly, let's go ahead and hop into, how do I pronounce your name? Fatele East? Mr. Eastover is a 5-star gem, as you guys can see. Very quickly, we will run down his attributes and say where he does rank, given the average of all 4 and 5 stars I have able to basically make the data for. Awareness, his a 75. The best I've ever found is 76, and the lowest I've ever found was 69. Very funny number, which is kind of intriguing that their awareness stats very high, especially compared to the average rating for most prospects. So he ranks 1 away from perfection. Speed, he is 88 speed. The best I've ever found is 88, so therefore he's tied with the best speed rating I've ever found, and the lowest speed rating I've ever found was 77. See, 11-point range right there, which is very interesting. Next, we have acceleration. He has a 91 acceleration, which again does tie him, you guessed it, with the highest amount of acceleration I've ever found of a Mike Lurker linebacker of a 91. And the lowest I've ever found was an 87, making a very tight 4-point cluster, which I kind of had higher expectations for, but that's just kind of how it works. Another stat I was genuinely shocked didn't have a higher range of clusters was the strength stat. He has 79 strength, as you guys can see. The highest I've ever found was 82, and the lowest I've ever found was 77, which puts him smack dab in the middle, which kind of makes sense because, again, later on we're going to cover the important stats and the less important stats, and shocker, acceleration and strength are just not as important as other stats. Next, we have play rec to round off the left-hand column of a 71. The best play rec I've ever found was 72, and the worst I've ever found was 67, making it, again, a nice 5-point cluster. He is 1 away from perfection, so he's overall pretty good, as you guys can see so far. Close to perfection, not quite there for some stats, but he's very good overall. Next, we have tackling of an 80. The highest tackling I've ever found was an 81. The lowest I've ever found was a 74. Puts him, again, 1 away from perfection. Hit power of an 85. The best I've ever found prior to last night was 85. However, while I was streaming live, shameless plug, do stream Monday through Friday almost every single day on YouTube, do random rebuild challenges or just general rebuilds. If you have any tips and tricks and questions you get from these videos and I don't answer them for some reason in the comments, do stop by the stream. It's a fun time. Shameless plug, I know. But yeah, prior to last night, the range was 70 on the low end for hit power and the high end of an 85. However, I did find on stream a Mike Lurker 5-star at 87 hit power, so that, got to change the data point there, which is so incredibly rare. We're talking out of hundreds of people That's the only linebacker I've ever seen as a lurker have 87 hit power, which is just astonishing. But that 17-point range is massive. And again, we'll cover later on in the video what are the important stats. And to the surprise of no one, hit power is going to be one of those stats. Next, of an 84 pursuit, the best I've ever found was 85. The lowest was 82. A 3-point range there, which is disgustingly close. Kind of, again, just like acceleration and strength, the stat kind of doesn't really matter. If it's that close, there's really no impact for having a low pursuit, but obviously you like that higher. Next, man coverage of a 71 is actually tied for the best man coverage I've ever found of a 71. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, the lowest I've ever found was a 64. And then rounding off the stats you guys can see on the scouting report, we have zone of a 78. The best zone I've ever found was an 80, and the worst zone I've ever found was a 75. So he very close to perfection for many stats like awareness, zone coverage, tackle, stuff like that. And he has perfection in things like man coverage, acceleration, hit power, and stuff like that. So overall, would be the prototypical best Mike Lurker linebacker you could find. Very high speed, very high hit power, and solid stats everywhere else. Now, very quickly, we're going to cover, in my opinion, again, always recommend this when I make these videos. As always, I advise you to look at the full picture. Don't just tunnel vision and look at a few stats. However, if you were to boil it down to just key stats, the two key stats I highly advise you to specifically focus on is speed and hit power. Speed has a massive 11-point range, and hit power has a massive 17-point range. I have noticed, especially analytically, that typically the faster the Mike Lurker linebacker is and the harder they hit, the better dev traits they have. By all means, I'm not saying you can't have a guy spawn with low hit power and low speed and be elite dev. That can happen. There is some range and some variability. There's obviously luck in these things. But generally speaking, if you want to play the odds and increase the chances you can have to have the game not screw you, generally speaking, the two key stats you want to look for is as much speed as you can, as much hit power as you can. As for the bonus stats, these are the stats that you do not get to see on the scouting report. However, they do appear on the team, and I do feel like they are semi-useful. So here, they're going to be these stats. We'll go ahead, block shed. For Lurker linebackers, the block shed ratings can range from the high end of a 74 and the low end of a 63. The power move can range from the mid-60s, aka 65, all the way to 50. And the finesse move, which is surprisingly better than the power move, I didn't really see that coming. The high end of a finesse move I found was 71, and the lowest was 54. So by no means am I saying you can just swap these guys to defensive end. Obviously, if they have the height and the weight profile, you can. But they actually have surprisingly high amounts of power move and finesse move, far more than what I thought they would have. And then lastly, to round out their extra stats, their catching stats, again, they are lurkers. They are meant to be used by the user. Their catching can range on the high end of a 73, which is just insane, right? To put into perspective, a 73 catching is something that most safeties and corners don't even have. So incredibly high catching on the high end. On the low end, though, it's 56 catching, which is about what thumpers have. So they're, on average, you're going to have better catching than everyone else. But on the top side, they have insane catching. Next, agility. Again, they're going to be your user. The agility does kind of matter. Their agility can range from 83 on the low end and 86 on the high end, which kind of disappoints me. I was fully expecting for the lurker archetype to have more agility and more COD because, again, they are your user, but I guess they are still a linebacker at the end of the day. And lastly, to round out the bonus stats, we have change of direction or COD. On the low ends, also an 80, and on the high ends, only an 86. For the next example, we have another 5-star gem, Josh Rosie. As you guys can see, very quickly to cover his stats and then kind of briefly explain why he's a star dev, in my opinion. He's upper percentile stats for awareness, speed, acceleration, strength, and pursuit, which is almost 5 of his stats. 5 of his 10 available stats are upper percentile, along with being 1 away from perfection for things like zone coverage, for play rec, and 2 away from perfection for man coverage and tackle. I think the big nail in his coffin, though, is unfortunately the hit power. He does so many things well, which, again, does explain why he's not normal dev and why he's not a star dev prospect. However, he is lacking the key thing, which is hit power. As you guys can see, you could overlap the previous guy's stats over this guy's stats, and they're, again, very similar. Both have 88 speed, both very fast, but again, as I said, If you just do the speed hit power check, what is he lacking? Hit power. What does the other guy have? Hit power. That's kind of it. Otherwise, he's very good at many, many, many other things. As I hear you guys saying, oh, Beastly, obviously they're 5 stars, they're always good, as I've shown you in this series a plethora of times. Just because you're a 5-star does not guarantee you to be good. Now, I don't have any 5-star examples in this video due to me removing all of them, the excess ones, but I can assure you 5-star normal devs do exist, whether they do or don't have a red gem. Very quickly, we're going to cover John Marble. Marble? These names. John, anyways, as you guys can see, he's elite dev. He's a 4-star, so do keep that in mind, even though the 4-star and 5-star prospects do have similar attributes, which is the reason why I do compare them. They are different at the end of the day. However, if you look at John's stats, he's upper percentile for speed, for tackling, for zone, pursuit. He's very good at those key stats. He's a 4-star, so obviously if you were to put these stats on a 5-star, it would be a bit disappointing. But for a 4-star, just to give you a little idea, add like 1 or 2 stats across the board, and that's kind of what his 5-star would look like. And as you guys can see, bada bing, bada boom, 84 speed puts him as exceptionally fast. And what do you see? Elite dev. So I'm not saying that hit power doesn't matter, but in my hierarchy of ranking lurker linebackers, it's speed first and then hit power second. If they have both of those stats, I'm going to pursue them. If they just have one of those 2 stats, they got to have speed. For a 4-star, you're looking at 84, 85 speed. For a 5-star, you're looking at 87, 88 speed. If those 2 metrics can be made, you are doing great. Now, I guess we can cover what a normal dev would look like of a 4-star variety. We have Robert Gage. Very quickly, he has terrible speed, okay acceleration, terrible strength, terrible play rec, terrible tackle, terrible hit power, okay zone, okay man, but he just fails at absolutely every check you can. But Beastly, of course, he's a bust. There's a red gem next to him. I hear, always I get in the comments, they're a bust. Why would you, here's another, wrong button. Here is another example of someone else who's normal dev, who also equally sucks. Emmett Mills fails the speed, acceleration, play rec, tackle, hit power, pursuit, man coverage. He has okay zone coverage, I'll give him that much, but he just fails way too many categories across the board to be anything at all, which is why, to no one's surprise, both of these prospects are normal dev, especially considering one's a bust. Even this guy is not a bust, but I don't need the game to tell me he's a bust to see that he's a bust, right? He sucks. And then lastly, to round out this archetype, we have Femi Lepe. Again, EA, can you just give me a Jimmy, a John, a Jacob, a William, something basic, please? But Femi over here is a 4-star with a gem. As you can see, Beastly, he has exceptional speed. He has to be elite dev. He has to be star dev. I'm going to go after this guy in my online dynasty. He's a secret gem. Bada, yada bing, bada boom. And then you get him on your team and you're like, oh, it's impact dev. Why is he impact dev? Well, very quickly, we will cover this. Speed, obviously 86, upper percentile. Don't got to explain that. Very high next. Acceleration of an 87. That's actually the bare minimum he can have, is 87, which is bad. That is terrible. Next of his strength is 78. The bare min's 77. So he's bare minning out in acceleration. He's 1 away from minning out in strength. For play rec, he has a 67. And if you can guess where this is going, that's also the bare minimum. So he minned out 3 of the 5 attributes on the left column. And then on the right-hand column, tackling, I'll give him that. Tackling's very good, right? 80, max at 81. That's very good. Hit power is a 72. So he's 2 away from minning out, which is pretty garbage. Pursuit, again, I'll give him that. That's very good of an 84. The best I've ever found was an 85. Man coverage of a 66 is almost minned out as well. So if you can see a trend here, half of his stats are minned out or very closely minned out. The stats that aren't minned out, right, like zone of a 77 is a very good stat for him, but it's in the dead center, right? It's 2 away from the worst he could possibly have, a 75, and it's 3 away from the best he could possibly have of an 80. So he's mid at zone, terrible at hit power, at man coverage, acceleration, at strength, and play rec. And then his only 2 redeeming, or 3 technically, his only 3 redeeming qualities is speed, pursuit, and tackle. So again, when you run the risk of not looking at the full picture, you will find people like Femi over here who, 86 speed and a gem, he has to be elite dev, and then you get him on your team and you're like, he stinks. Now, he could have good skill caps, right? You could do a lot with him as a user, right? 86 speed's nothing to laugh at, but I'm just telling you that you gotta be careful, you gotta look at the full picture. And with that being said, I probably should have put this at the beginning of the video, but get this video to 250 likes, and all of the data from this video will be updated in the cheat sheet. And secondly, go in the comments down below of this video and vote on what is the next group we will be doing on offense. I believe the last remaining groups is tight end, receiver, and offensive line. I do believe. So now with that being said, that is all of the Lurker data points, and let's go ahead and hop into the athletic thumpers. Officially rounding out the final Mike archetype, the athletic thumpers. This archetype is very interesting to me. Personally, they're the ones that people talk the most about, that hyped the most up into oblivion. But it's kind of weird how this archetype works because they're not really a safety slash corner, which is what a lot of people move these guys to. But they're not really an elite linebacker either. They're kind of that like big nickel hybrid of both a safety slash linebacker. By no means am I saying that they're just an overall bad archetype. But the issue with, again, most athletes is on the upper percentile, the upper scale, when you hit that generational athlete like Dontrell Carmen over here, he's insane. Good hit power, good speed, good tackle, he's insane, right? Good coverage. But most of them are not going to be that 5-star generational. Most of them are going to be normal 5 stars and or normal 4 stars, and they're kind of just mid. So as all, with all the athletes, their potential, their ceiling is through the roof. But their floor is also very low. So you got to run that gamble and run that risk, which is why generally I don't ever advise people to go after athletes unless there's a gem next to them. That green gem at least guarantees impact dev. So, but that's just everything I've observed. Let's go ahead and run down the data, shall we? For Dontrell Carmen, he is 67 awareness, which puts him 1 away from perfection. The best I've ever had was 68. The lowest I've ever had was 63. For speed, he is 91 speed, which is the fastest of anyone I have ever found. Ties him with the fastest I've ever found of 91. And the lowest I've ever found was an 87 speed thumper. Next, for acceleration, he is 89 acceleration, which puts him several away from perfection, the highest being 92 and the lowest being 87. Next, we have strength, which is, again, why the main hybrid role of being a safety slash, linebacker hybrid is they just don't have the same strength as thumpers, but they're also significantly more athletic than thumpers. So you got to have that trade. His strength of a 74 puts him 1 away from minning out. The lowest I've ever found was a 73, the highest being an 81. For play rec, his play rec's a 79. The best I've ever found was an 81. The lowest I've ever found was a 63. Going over to the next column, his tackling of an 89 does tie him with the best I've ever found of an 89, and the lowest I've ever found being an 80. Hit power, which is a very important stat for these guys as well. His hit power is an 81, which, is not bad. The lowest being I've ever found of a 75, the highest of an 84. So he's, closer to the high end than the low end, that's for sure. But you obviously can still find better. Pursuit of a 77 does kind of lean more towards that bottom half. Yeah, it does, sadly. 76 being the lowest I've ever found versus 83 being the highest I've ever found. Next, man coverage. Man coverage has a significant range with these guys. Him having 79 puts him at tied for the upper percentile, tied for the highest I've ever had of a 79, and then the lowest of a 58. Zone of a 75 is unfortunately a minned out attribute, 75 being the lowest and 78 being the highest. Kind of weird that they only have a 3-point range for those stats, which is fairly interesting. Next, for the bonus stats that you don't unfortunately get to see on the scouting report till they're on your team. Block shed, this can range pretty significantly, going from the lowest being a 67 to the high end of an 82. Power move and finesse move, just like their brethren, are very high. However, they're not as high as them. The power move can range from 73 on the high end all the way down to a 64 on the low end. The finesse move can range from a 62 on the low end all the way to a 76 on the high end. And lastly, because they do typically get moved to secondary positions, I figured let's go ahead and do press, because why not? Their press can range from 64 all the way to 73, which is not great, but considering you can upgrade that press, that's not bad having a linebacker, safety, corner hybrid who can sometimes press. More bonus stats, since a lot of people do use these guys as their user, I figured I might as well go ahead and get their catching, agility, and COD to compare them to the actual lurkers. Their catching stats, significantly better, ranging from a 74 on the high end, however, the minimum being a 65. So even though the ceiling is very comparable to a Lurker, the floor is nowhere close. Right? The floor for a Lurker was 56. The floor for an athlete is 65. It's not even close. Next, agility. Their agility can range from 85 on the low end and 91 on the high end. Significantly better than the Lurkers. And then lastly, we have change of direction or COD. The low end is an 82 and the high end is an 89. So, with all that being said, why is Dontrell Carman an elite dev athlete thumper? Well, it's very simple. He has upper percentile speed, which you guessed it, speed is very, very, very important for this archetype. The other thing that's very important with this archetype is also man coverage. Man coverage is very, very, very important. If you had to basically choose the two stats that need to be high to increase your odds of having a dev trait, you want as much man coverage as you can squeeze into your 4/5 star. You want as much speed as you can squeeze into your 4 and 5 star. And then, in my opinion, tackling and hit power is also super important. However, I wouldn't put it on the same level as speed or man coverage. I would put speed first, then man coverage. And if they have good speed and good man coverage, I would then look for hit power and tackle. But those four attributes are kind of more important than everything else. As you guys can see with Dontrell Carman, that is in fact why he's an elite dev. He's obviously pretty good stats everywhere, but generally speaking, he has far better stats in the important areas than the average athlete thumper. So for the next example, I'm going to show you is a 5-star by the name of Ben Burt. I'm not going to cover every single one of his stats just to kind of speed along this video, but very quickly, he has upper percentile stats for play rec, for tackling, for hit power, and man coverage, which is 4 of his main stats. And of his 4 stats, 2 of those 4 stats would be what I would classify as the important stats. By no means am I saying his speed's bad of an 89. It's actually kind of smack dab in the middle, right? 87 is the low end and 91 is the high end. So he's quite literally in the middle. Same thing with awareness. He's several points away from minning out, but also several points away from maxing out. His pursuit of a 77 is pretty bad, but again, that's why he's kind of a star dev prospect. If he had all the bells and whistles of the elite devs, he would have the bells and whistles. He has a lot of key great stats. Don't get me wrong, again, 75 man coverage is very good. 88 tackling is very good. 84 hit power is very good. He has a lot of good stats. He's just not great, which in my opinion, that does differentiate what a star dev prospect is in relation to an elite dev. Next, we have the impact dev example of a 4-star being Marcus Conrad. Marcus Conrad has very good speed. As you guys can see, oh, he's 90 speed. He has to be insane, basically just like the previous impact dev example I showed you for the Lurkers. I will show you for the Thumpers. Wow, 90 speed, crazy, right? He's 1 away from perfection. He has terrible hit power, terrible pursuit, terrible man coverage, terrible play rec, terrible strength, not very good acceleration or tackling. And you guys can get the picture. He has the speed down pat. I'll give him that. He has good speed, and I guess technically good pursuit, too. That's an 83, so he has good speed, good pursuit, but that's literally it. I guess I lied. Good speed, good pursuit, and good zone. 3 of his 10 stats are good. He fails everything else. Speed sucks, play rec sucks, acceleration, awareness, tackling sucks, hit power sucks, man coverage, abysmal. You get the point. I guess that also, would make him impact dev, because clearly he has some talent. He has some things going his way, obviously. Otherwise, he would be a normal dev, but he doesn't have everything. So the star dev prospect, I think had, 4 or 5 good key attributes. This guy has 3 key attributes. So that sounds about right. The elite dev had, 6 or 7, maybe even 8 elite attributes. The star dev had half of that, and this guy has less of that. So I guess it all kind of, now that I'm saying it out loud mid-video, it all's kind of just making sense. And then the last person we will cover in this video is Stefan Muti. As, again, very quickly going to cover him. He sucks. He's normal dev. Why is he normal dev? Well, beastly, he's normal dev because his stats just suck. Bare min for speed, for, so many other attributes. Pursuit, man coverage, zone coverage. His hit power stinks. His tackling stinks. This guy, he even fails at awareness of an 83. Like, this guy just kind of fails at everything. He has okay strength, I guess, but you don't want your one attribute to be strength as your redeeming quality. Everything else just kind of sucks. Which, again, even without the red busted gem, this guy also fails the speed, hit power, tackle, man coverage, mini cluster I've been, talking about with this archetype. And so, yeah, overall, he just stinks. Okay, that is all the data points from this video. Now let's go ahead and roll the outro. As always, I hope you have a wonderful morning, evening, night, afternoon, or day, depending on whatever time you watch my content in the future. Like, comment, subscribe on YouTube, give me a follow or sub on Twitch. I would greatly appreciate it. And if you can, become a member. Members get a ton of perks in this channel. You get early access to all my videos, extra voting in the Discord, extra voting in the live streams, recommendations for future videos, live streams, video ideas, and much, much more. Shout out all you amazing goats on the screen right here. Appreciate all the members. I appreciate y'all so much. And yeah, guys, I will see you in the next one. Deuces.